They found her body behind the church's cross wall, wrapped in plastic, sealed in silence, and hidden by the very man who called himself her father. He smiled during sermons, led prayer groups, and tucked her in at night. Then built a tomb inside the sanctuary. But the real twist? The church knew, and they helped him hide it. You think this is just a crime story? Wait until you hear what the mother did next. Watch the full story. They found her body behind the church wall, not buried underground, not hidden in some crawl space, but sealed behind a wall that held up the giant cross in the main chapel of Resurrection Church in Southside Chicago. I was standing 20 feet away when the construction crew broke through the plaster. I heard the first shout before I saw anything. Then came the stench, like death that had been dressed up in perfume and denial. The men backed away, one of them retching into a bucket. And then the forensics light hit something shiny. It was plastic. A thick, translucent tarp wrapped around something in the shape of a curled-up child. I knew in that instant. My knees gave out before my brain caught up. I couldn't scream. I couldn't breathe. But I could see him. Grant. My husband. Standing perfectly still behind the pews, wearing his usual steel blue suit and that silver tie pin shaped like a dove. He didn't look shocked. He didn't even look surprised. He just stared at the wall with an expression so flat it could have been carved from stone. And when our eyes met, he smiled. Just a slight tug of the lips. Like he'd won something I didn't even know we were playing. That was the moment I knew my daughter was never missing. She had been murdered. Hidden behind the very symbol we were told would protect us. And the man I let into my home, into my life, into Emily's life. He had done it. My name is Rachel Hennessy. I'm 37 years old. I teach 4th grade at Emmett Elementary. I live in a modest one-story house a few blocks from Resurrection Church. I used to be the kind of woman who didn't make trouble. I followed rules. I smiled when I didn't feel like it. I believed in second chances, in forgiveness, in the sanctity of marriage. When Emily's father died in a car accident 6 years ago, I told myself that God had a plan, that faith would carry us through. And for a while, it did. Emily was only 10 then. But she was so strong, so gentle. She loved cats and wrote poetry in her diary about the shape of clouds. She would sneak into my bed some nights just to talk about the stars. I told myself she'd be okay, that we'd be okay. Then I met Grant. He was charming. A financial advisor for the church, clean-cut, eloquent, deeply involved in every fundraiser, every youth camp, every Easter production. Widowed like me. No kids. He told me I deserved to be happy again. That Emily deserved a father figure. The congregation loved him. Pastor Morgan practically glowed whenever he spoke about Grant's generosity and devotion to the Lord. I was lonely, and tired, and guilty for wanting a life beyond my grief. So I said yes when he proposed. I should have listened to the knots in my stomach when Emily looked at him the way deer look at headlights. But I didn't. The first few months after the wedding, things were fine. Grant brought home flowers. He helped Emily with her algebra. He volunteered to chaperone her school field trip. But slowly, things changed. He became obsessed with discipline. He criticized Emily's posture, her clothes, her tone. He once slapped a juice box out of her hand because she drank it too loudly. I confronted him. He apologized. He cried. Said he had a rough childhood and wanted better for her. He said love looked like structure, that I was too soft. I believed him. I always believed him, but Emily didn't. She started pulling away. Her poetry stopped. She flinched when Grant entered the room. She stopped sleeping in her bed. I found her curled up in the linen closet once, clutching her old teddy bear. I asked her what was wrong. She said she hated Sundays. That the church made her feel small. That Grant stood too close during prayer time. I told her I'd talk to him. She begged me not to. Said it would only get worse. I was torn between two loyalties. My daughter. My husband. My faith. So I prayed. But God was silent. And then, Christmas Eve came. The last time I saw Emily was after dinner. She wore her red sweater with the snowflake patches. She was quiet, but not scared. She hugged me longer than usual. I remember kissing her forehead and whispering that we'd open presents early the next morning. She smiled. Then she disappeared. The police came. There were no signs of forced entry. No ransom note. No body. Just a note on her pillow that said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I can't live like this. Don't look for me." The handwriting was wrong. The tone was wrong. Emily wouldn't have written that. I knew it in my bones. But Grant showed the note to the officers like it was gospel. He told them Emily was troubled. That she had mood swings. That she probably ran away with some online friend. I wanted to scream. But they listened to him. Because he wore a suit. Because he donated to the mayor's campaign. Because he was a man, and I was just a grieving woman with nothing but intuition and a broken heart. The church held a vigil. Candles. Prayers. A schwach song about eternal light. I wasn't allowed to speak. Grant gave the closing words. Said he forgave Emily for the pain she caused. Said he still loved her wherever she was. People wept. Pastor Morgan wrapped his arm around me like a photo op. And I stood there. Trapped in a performance I couldn't exit. Grieving a daughter no one would even admit was gone for good. That was 10 months ago. 10 months of hollow mornings. Of sleeping on the floor in her room just to feel her ghost. Of dreaming about the sound of her laugh. 10 months of being told to move on. Of watching Grant get promoted to church treasurer. Of watching Pastor Morgan name a scholarship after Emily, like she was a storybook character. Not a girl with real blood and real fears and real cries that I didn't hear in time. And now, she's been found. Wrapped in a tarp. Hidden behind the cross. The cross. The same one Grant insisted we donate to the church 3 months after she vanished. A massive, ornate, gold-leafed cross that required renovation of the entire front wall. I remember thinking it was excessive, but Grant said it would be a tribute to God's sovereignty. Now I know it was a tombstone. The forensic team began pulling back the layers. Bits of hair. Fabric. A bracelet. Her bracelet. The one I gave her on her 12th birthday with the tiny cat charm. My vision blurred. My chest burned. Reporters began to gather outside. I saw flashing lights. I heard murmurs. Is that the mother? Oh my God. It's her daughter? But none of that mattered. Only one thing mattered. My daughter had never left. She had been screaming from behind the wall. And no one had heard. And Grant, that man, that monster. He stood there with his hands folded in front of him. Calm as Sunday morning. When the officers turned to him, he didn't resist. Just looked around and asked for his lawyer. Not 1 ounce of panic. Not a drop of remorse. Like he had rehearsed it all. Like it was just another sermon. And as they led him away, I remembered something Emily once said. Just 2 weeks before Christmas. She had been drawing in her diary when she looked up at me and said, "Mom, if something ever happens to me, don't trust the man in the tie." I didn't understand then. I do now. Too late, but not too late for justice. Not too late for truth. Not too late for me. I will burn the whole damn church down if I have to. Not with fire. With every truth they buried with my daughter. Starting with the man in the tie. Grant. My husband. The man I let hold my daughter's hand. He is the beginning of the end, and I will be the one who finishes it. Emily wasn't just a victim. She was my child. She was the reason I kept breathing after Daniel died. When I found out I was pregnant at 25, I was terrified. Daniel and I had barely figured out how to afford rent, much less a baby. But when I saw the first sonogram, a fuzzy black and white bean on the monitor with a flickering heartbeat, I fell in love, in a way I didn't think was possible. Emily was born on a rainy September morning, crying louder than any baby in the ward. The nurses called her the siren, but to me, she was music. She had Daniel's green eyes, my chin, and a stubbornness that could outmatch gravity. From the moment she could walk, she was always climbing, always reaching, always chasing something no one else could see. Butterflies, light through windows. The exact shape of a cloud, she swore, looked like a sleeping bear. That's how she was, quiet, but full of galaxies. When Daniel died, she was only 7. A drunk driver ran a red light. The impact crushed the passenger side. Daniel had been on his way to pick up groceries. Emily was the one who found the voicemail. He had left her a message, reminding her to feed the goldfish and telling her he loved her more than cookies. She played it every night for weeks. I watched my daughter lose the light in her eyes, and I hated myself for not knowing how to bring it back. We moved to my mother's old house in Southside Chicago. I went back to teaching. Emily started drawing. Clouds. Mostly. And cats. She once drew a picture of herself standing on a cloud with Daniel waving from the sky. I still have it in my wallet. She told me she didn't like the word dead. She said it sounded like the end, and she believed Daniel wasn't gone. Just somewhere quieter. That kind of hope breaks your heart more than any grief. For years it was just us. I learned how to braid her hair for school picture day. She learned how to cook grilled cheese without burning the pan. We laughed more than we cried. Until I got lonely. Until I convinced myself I could have more. That's when I met Grant. At first, he seemed like the answer to a whispered prayer. He volunteered at the church's tutoring program where I brought Emily on Tuesdays. He complimented her drawings, brought me coffee without asking how I took it, somehow, already knowing it was 2 creams. No sugar. He was patient. He asked about Daniel and listened without judgment. He said I was strong, that he admired the way I raised Emily alone, that she deserved a father who stayed. I was cautious, but he was persistent. Emily didn't say much. She was polite but distant. I chalked it up to the fear of change. Kids resist new figures. I told myself, give her time. She'll come around. She never did. And I never asked why. Not really. Not deeply. I ignored the way she tensed when Grant touched her shoulder. I ignored how she stopped inviting friends over. I ignored how her journal disappeared from her nightstand the week after we moved in with him. She told me once, in a whisper, "Mom, I don't think he likes me." And I said, "That's not true. Honey, he just has rules. It's good to have structure." She looked at me with eyes too old for 13 and asked, "Even if it makes you disappear?" I didn't understand the question. Or maybe I refused to. Now, I can't stop replaying that sentence in my mind, like it's the last thread holding up the sky. Because that's what Grant did. He made her disappear. Slowly, then suddenly, he erased her voice, her joy, her very existence. And I let him. The weeks after she vanished were a blur of police reports and hollow prayers. They searched the school, her friends' homes, local bus stations. Nothing. Grant was calm. Too calm. He spoke to the press. He helped design missing posters. He even suggested which photo to use, one from the Christmas party at church, where Emily's smile looked tight and unnatural. When I said we should use her school photo instead, he insisted. This one makes her look happier. That's what people need to see. I gave in. Again, he held my hand at vigils. He read scripture. He hugged me when I cried. but never once did I see him cry. Not one tear. That should have meant something. But I was drowning, and he offered the illusion of a life raft. I clung to it, until I couldn't anymore. It started with a drawer. One day, 2 months after Emily's disappearance, I was cleaning the study. Grant had gone to a deacon's meeting. I opened the bottom drawer of his locked cabinet with a spare key I found in his sock drawer. Inside was a red spiral notebook. Emily's handwriting. Her drawings. But every page was crossed out with a red marker. Angry. Jagged lines. Like someone was trying to erase her, even from paper. My hands shook. There was also a USB drive. I didn't open it then. I was scared. I wasn't ready to face what it might hold. So I tucked it under my mattress. Like a secret too heavy to carry, but too dangerous to expose. Then there was the basement. Grant always kept it locked. Said it was where he stored tax documents and sensitive financial files for the church. But I saw him go down there late at night, sometimes for hours. Once I heard him humming, a low, tuneless murmur that made my skin crawl. I started staying up, watching, waiting. One night, I followed. I crept down the stairs as quietly as I could. The door was ajar. He stood facing a wall, his hand pressed flat against the brick, whispering something. I couldn't make out the words, but I felt them like ice in my bones. That was the night I knew Emily wasn't lost. She was here, somewhere in this house. In this man's past, in these walls, I told Pastor Morgan. I begged him to listen, to ask questions. He patted my hand and said, grief made people imagine things. That Grant was a pillar of the community. That, if Emily had been harmed, they would have found something by now. I realized then the church didn't want truth. It wanted peace. And Grant gave them that. A neat story. A clean image. A controlled narrative. But I couldn't play along anymore. I started documenting. Everything. I installed a voice recorder under Grant's desk. I took photos of the basement floor. I copied financial records he left on the kitchen counter. I reached out to a journalist I found online, a woman named Jenna Pierce, who had covered abuse in another church scandal. I didn't give my name at first. I just asked her one question. If a man builds a wall inside a church, and your daughter goes missing, is that a clue or a coincidence? She responded in under 5 minutes. It's a crime scene. Tear it down. Oh! I tried. I begged the police to search the church again. They refused. Said there was no probable cause. That too much time had passed. That the wall had been constructed under full permits. But Jenna pushed. She filed a Freedom of Information request. She found that the permit for the wall renovation was rushed, signed off by a city clerk, who had since been fired. The construction company was paid in cash. No receipts. No records. She called it what it was, a cover-up, and then she sent the email that changed everything. She forwarded me a photo. A construction blueprint of the church. Highlighted in red was the interior of the main cross wall. A hollow cavity. Just wide enough for a small person. Just deep enough to be forgotten. Her caption read, "Call the police. Tell them you want this wall opened. And if they refuse, tell them you have a journalist ready to publish a story titled, 'The Cross That Hid a Child.'" I did. And they came. And they found her. And now. I remember the last thing Emily said to me before she went to bed that night. "Mom, if something happens," I remember, I tried to tell you. Just don't let him win. I didn't understand then, but I do now. And I won't let him win. The world didn't end the day they pulled Emily's body from the church wall. But mine did. The sun rose the next morning like it always did, casting golden light over a city that no longer looked the same to me. The Resurrection Church steeple still stood tall above the south side skyline. glinting like it had nothing to hide. But I knew better. Everyone knew now. Reporters crowded the sidewalks. Parishioners wept into microphones. A memorial of teddy bears and white lilies grew by the chapel steps. And I stood behind the police line, watching Grant's face plastered across every news station, every headline, every whispered conversation. They called him the man in the tie, the treasurer, the deacon, the devout husband. But I called him something else. Predator, manipulator, murderer. And once, I called him mine. The detectives questioned me for 6 hours straight. I told them everything. From the drawer with Emily's red notebook to the USB I hadn't dared open until now. On it were dozens of files, spreadsheets, emails, recordings. But one folder stopped my breath. It was labeled Redemption. Inside were images, photos of Emily. Sleeping, eating, reading. All taken from angles that made me sick. Hidden camera angles. Some from inside our own home. My knees buckled. I saw her brushing her hair. In her room. In the hallway. In the bathroom. My daughter had been watched. Hunted. Not by a stranger, but by a man who sat at our dinner table and said grace. I screamed until my throat was raw. The lead detective, a woman named Ortiz, gently pulled me into another room. She didn't say much. She just looked at me with eyes that knew that kind of evil. Knew what it did to mothers. That night I went home alone. The house was still. Too still. Her door was shut. I opened it slowly. Her bed was still made the way she left it. Her posters. The cats. The Van Gogh print I bought her on her 13th birthday still clung to the walls like faded memories. I sat on the edge of her bed and read her diary. What was left of it? The pages Grant hadn't destroyed. She had written about the nights he stood outside her door. The way he called her his gift. The way he said God brought her into his life to heal old wounds. I felt my soul rip open. My baby had lived in a prison while I looked the other way, clinging to faith and denial and false promises. I called Jenna, the journalist, at 2 a.m. She answered on the first ring. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said only, "We're going public. By sunrise." Chicago woke to a front-page headline, "Treasurer of Resurrection Church charged in death of teen stepdaughter." Below it was a picture of Grant being led out in cuffs. But it was the sub-headline that gutted me. Mother warned church months before daughter disappeared. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion. Parishioners I hadn't heard from in months flooded my inbox. I had no idea. "I'm so sorry. He fooled us all." "No, he didn't. You let him. You needed him to be good, so you didn't have to question the system that protected him." Pastor Morgan held a press conference. He said he was heartbroken and shocked. He said the church had no knowledge of any misconduct. But I remembered his hand on mine when I begged him to listen. When I whispered, "Emily's not safe." And he told me to pray harder. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. I walked into the church that afternoon. Past the media vans and the flowers and the lies. The front doors were unlocked. Empty. Hollow. Like the building itself was ashamed. I stood in the sanctuary where Emily's body had been hidden. The cross still hung, gleaming in the stained glass light. I reached out and touched it. Cold. Heavy. I whispered, "I'm sorry. Baby. I'm here now." That's when I saw it. A folded piece of paper wedged behind the pulpit. I pulled it out with trembling hands. It was old, wrinkled. Emily's handwriting, a note she must have written before the end. It said, "If someone finds this, please tell my mom I love her. Tell her I tried to fight. Tell her it wasn't her fault. He said no one would believe me. But I still believed in her. I sank to the ground, clutching the paper, rocking back and forth like maybe, just maybe, I could hold her again through ink and memory and grief. The police raided Grant's storage unit that evening. They found another wall, another space behind it. Inside were boxes of VHS tapes. Tapes from other states. Other girls. Some gone missing. Some never reported. He was a serial predator. Hidden in plain sight. Wearing ties and quoting scripture. The prosecution team called it the darkest case of abuse ever uncovered in a Chicago church. But to me, it was just Emily's story finally being heard. The city erupted. The mayor held press conferences. Community leaders marched outside Resurrection Church, demanding accountability. Victims came forward. A girl from Iowa. Another from Ohio. All of them had once known a man who introduced himself as Brother Grant. And always, he came with a Bible in one hand and a lie in the other. But amidst the fire, something else happened. Something I didn't expect. Survivors began writing to me. Mothers, daughters, sisters, women who had been silenced, ignored, disbelieved. They said Emily gave them courage, that her voice, even from the grave, was louder than any pulpit. I started speaking. Publicly. At vigils. At forums. At schools. I told her story again and again, until it no longer shattered me. I looked into the eyes of girls who flinched at loud noises and told them, "You are not broken. You are not weak. You are surviving." And all the while, I waited for the trial. I needed to face Grant. I needed to say the words he couldn't erase. I needed him to see me, not as the quiet wife who served him dinner, but as the mother who would never stop fighting for her child. The indictment came swiftly. First-degree murder. Aggravated sexual assault. Unlawful imprisonment. More charges were added every week, as more victims came forward. Grant remained silent. No plea. No apology. Just that same damn tie in every court photo, but I wasn't silent. I had her diary, I had her voice, and I would carry it into that courtroom like a sword. Because Emily was not just a victim, she was the girl who loved clouds, and now, she would rise. They called it the Trial of the Cross, on every news network. Cameras lined the steps of the Cook County Courthouse as if waiting for some fallen prophet. The courtroom was packed with journalists, protesters, survivors, parishioners. There were people holding candles. Others held signs. One said justice for Emily. Another said how many behind the walls. But I didn't carry a sign. I carried her bracelet. The one with the cat charm. It was the only thing found on her body that wasn't too decomposed to recognize. I held it so tight in my fist that the metal etched into my palm. I didn't want to feel anything else. The prosecutor was a woman named Diana Walsh, middle-aged, sharp as a dagger, with grey streaks through her hair and a voice that didn't flinch. She walked into court with a single file in her hand and said, "This is not about faith. It's about betrayal, not just of a family, but of a community, of a child." And just like that, Emily became more than a name. She became the mirror no one wanted to look into. Grant entered, flanked by 2 deputies. Not here today. Just a prison-issued jumpsuit, the color of rotting sand. His hair was shorter, and he looked thinner. But his eyes, God, his eyes were the same. Cold, calculated, empty. When they brought him past me, he didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He looked straight through me like I was still the woman who made his dinner and trusted his lies. But I wasn't. Not anymore. The defense tried to play it predictable. Insanity. Repressed trauma. "Mister, Carson was a deeply disturbed man, abandoned by the foster system, misunderstood by every institution meant to help him, said his attorney. A man who looked like he'd never lost a case and never cared whom he won for. He believed he was saving the girl. He built that wall as a sanctuary, not a prison. I wanted to laugh, or scream, or tear out the seat in front of me. But I did none of those things. I sat still, silent, like a storm, waiting for the exact moment to rise. The first witness was Officer Ortiz. She described the day they broke open the church wall. She talked about the smell, the position of the body, the contents of the tarp. Then she showed the court the note. Emily wrote, "The one I found behind the pulpit. The one that ended with 'I still believe in her.'" My throat closed. My body shook. But I didn't cry. Not in front of him. Not in front of people who once told me I was imagining things. Then came the USB. The photos. The recordings. The courtroom fell into silence so sharp you could hear hearts breaking. Every image was time-stamped. Every whisper Grant recorded. Every prayer he weaponized was played aloud. Some people left the room. Others wept. I stayed. I made myself listen to every second of his darkness. Because if Emily had to live through it, I could damn well bear witness to it. But it was Jenna's testimony that turned the tide. She stood firm in her navy suit and read emails from two other girls, one from Cincinnati, one from Nebraska, who had once been part of church camps funded by Grant's ministry. Both had tried to report him. Both had been dismissed. The church moved him, she said. They didn't stop him. They reassigned him. Like a virus passed from sanctuary to sanctuary. My nails dug into the wooden bench until I felt splinters. I wanted to scream. How many Emilys were there? Then came my turn. I took the stand with the bracelet still in my hand. I looked at the jury. 12 strangers. Some older, some young. One wore a small gold cross. Another had tears in her eyes. And I spoke. I told them about Emily's laugh. The way she used to talk to birds. The night she begged me not to leave her alone. The drawing of the cloud she gave me after her father died. The last time I heard her voice. And then I looked at Grant. "I was your wife," I said. "Steady. I let you into my house, into my daughter's life. I believed you. I defended you. I watched you read scripture at our dinner table. I watched you place your hand on her shoulder and call it love. But it wasn't love. It was control. It was evil dressed in righteousness. And you didn't just kill Emily. You buried her inside a symbol meant to protect her." The courtroom was so silent it felt like space. Grant stared back. Still nothing. Not a flicker. That was his power. His mask. But it didn't matter anymore. Because the world had seen what was behind it. The trial lasted 12 days. On the 13th, the jury returned. Guilty. On all counts. First-degree murder. Sexual assault. Unlawful confinement. Evidence tampering. Child exploitation. Every word landed like thunder. Grant didn't move. The judge handed down a life sentence without parole. "You not only took a life," he said, "you built a church around the lie that protected you. And now, you'll spend your life behind walls you can't decorate with crosses." Oh, people clapped. Others sobbed. But I just sat there, holding the bracelet. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like breath. After drowning, as they led Grant away, he finally looked at me. 1 second. A flicker. Maybe regret. Maybe rage. I don't know. I don't care. Because in that moment, I felt Emily beside me. Not as a ghost, but as fire, as light, as something no wall could ever contain again. That night, I returned to the church alone. The pews were empty. The altar stripped bare, I walked up to the cross, touched its base, and whispered, "They can't silence you anymore." Oh, then I left. And I didn't look back. The weeks after the trial moved like a fog, not heavy, not light, just there hanging over everything, dulling the edges of the world. The Resurrection Church remained closed. Yellow police tape still fluttering in the wind like torn wings. News vans finally left. The journalists chasing fresher scandals. Newer headlines, but the pain they broadcast still lived here. In every brick. In every pew. In every mother who sat through every moment of that trial and wondered if she'd ever really known her child was safe. I couldn't sleep. Not deeply. I couldn't walk past a mirror without imagining Emily's reflection instead of mine. She would have been 15 now. Maybe taller. Maybe her curls would have grown out longer. Maybe she would have started high school art club. But the maybes were the worst part. They clung to me like dust. I couldn't wash off. I stayed in our house because I couldn't leave. Her scent still lingered faintly in her room. Her last school shoes sat by the closet, like she'd be back to grab them. I washed her bedsheets once, and cried for 3 hours because I realized I'd erased the last pillowcase she ever slept on. People kept asking if I wanted therapy. I said no. I didn't want to talk to someone who never knew her laugh. I didn't want to speak about grief in textbook terms. I wanted to burn down the system that let this happen, and so I started digging. The church hadn't just failed Emily. It had failed so many others. Pastor Morgan's press statements were smooth, crafted, polished like sermons. But I knew better. He'd heard me cry. He'd looked me in the eye and told me my concerns were ungodly fear. I requested every document I could, through the Freedom of Information Act. Jenna helped me access church records, old employee complaints, financial logs. What we found was a web one not built overnight. Grant wasn't the first predator in a position of power there, just the most visible. There was a woman named Helena Rhodes. She had filed a complaint 6 years ago when she was 17, claiming she was touched inappropriately during a youth retreat by an assistant pastor. The report was marked resolved. But there was no resolution, just a payout to her family and a quiet relocation of the man involved. The assistant pastor now worked at a different church in Indiana. Another girl. 15. From Michigan. Disappeared from a Bible camp that Grant had helped organize. Her case was never solved. It was believed she ran away with a boy. We found her mother. Her name was Denise. She lived alone with her son and still lit a candle for her daughter every Sunday. When I told her about Emily, we cried without needing to explain. I called a meeting, not at Resurrection. Of course. But at the community center across the street, I expected maybe 5 or 6 people. Almost 50 came. Mothers, sisters, former parishioners, a few brave men. We formed a circle. We shared our stories. Some were old. Some were fresh. But all were raw. Someone brought photos. Someone else brought candles. It wasn't a vigil. It was a reckoning. I stood up at the end and said, "They built walls to hide us. We're going to tear them down." And so we did. We filed a collective civil suit against Resurrection Church, Pastor Morgan, and the larger religious council that had overseen its operations. We named names. We presented documentation. We made noise. And the news came back. Report us. This time, not for a scandal, but for accountability. I was on the local evening broadcast sitting next to Jenna, holding a photo of Emily at age 10 with frosting on her nose and a cat in her lap. I told them, this isn't about destroying faith. This is about stopping people who use faith to destroy children. The next day, Pastor Morgan resigned. The church board disbanded. The council issued an apology. But it wasn't enough. We didn't want words. We wanted change. So we made our own. We formed an organization, Open Light, a coalition of survivors and mothers and daughters and whistleblowers. We held workshops, taught teenagers how to recognize grooming behaviors, provided legal resources for victims who had been ignored. We demanded new legislation, mandatory background checks, third-party investigations of church misconduct, protections for minor parishioners. And slowly, the world began to listen. People started writing letters from Texas, from Florida, from places I'd never been. They thanked Emily. They said her story gave them courage to speak, that her voice, though stolen, had created echoes loud enough to shake mountains. And me? I wasn't the same. I stopped asking why. I stopped blaming myself, because Emily had loved clouds. Yes, but she had also loved justice. And I had become the storm that carried both. One afternoon, I returned to the church grounds. It had been cleaned up. The yellow tape was gone. The walls painted. But the cross? It had been removed. In its place was an empty frame, an open space against the sky. I sat on the steps for a long time. A girl walked by with her mother and pointed. "Was that the place?" the little girl asked. Her mother nodded slowly. "That was where they found the brave girl." Not the dead girl. The brave girl, that was Emily, and I smiled. Finally. Not with grief, but with pride. Because the walls were down, and her light was everywhere. Grief is strange. At first, it crushes you like a tidal wave, drowning everything in its path. Then one day, without warning, it changes shape. It becomes keener, sharper, something like a shadow that walks just behind you. You learn to carry it like a second skin. That was what it became for me. Emily wasn't just a memory. She was a voice in the wind, a flicker in the corner of my eye, a weight in my chest that both hurt and held me upright. I still woke up some nights with the sound of her laughter ringing in my ears, only to remember she wasn't there. But those nights stopped feeling like torment. They started to feel like visits. I found an old video of her one morning while sorting through our garage. It was in an unlabeled DVD case, buried under Christmas decorations and paint cans. I sat down on the concrete floor, wiped the dust from the surface, and slid it into the old DVD player in the living room. The screen flickered. And there she was, 13. Maybe younger. Her hair was in 2 messy buns. And she was laughing so hard, she could barely speak. "Mom." She giggled. "Stop filming. I look like a chipmunk." The camera wobbled as my own voice off-screen replied. "You are a chipmunk." She stuck out her tongue. "I'm a majestic squirrel." "Thank you very much." Then she turned serious, leaned toward the camera, and said, "If I ever become famous, this is going in my documentary." I laughed and cried at the same time. She had that gift of making even her goofiest moments feel like prophecy. That video became my anchor. Every time I spoke to the press, to legislators, to grieving families, I carried it in my purse. Not as evidence, but as a reminder. Emily wasn't a statistic. She wasn't just a girl behind a wall. She was a vibrant, hilarious, deeply feeling child who deserved a world that listened. We continued the work. Open Light grew faster than any of us expected. Survivors from churches, youth programs, even public schools began reaching out. We held our first national summit in a modest hotel ballroom in St. Louis. Over 200 people came. I stood on stage with Denise, the mother of the girl from Michigan, and we lit candles for every name that had been submitted to us in silence. Some were confirmed victims. Others were still missing. But in that room, they weren't forgotten. At the back of the ballroom stood Jenna, arms crossed, tears in her eyes. After the event, she hugged me longer than anyone else. "You turned pain into protest." she said. Emily would be so proud. I believed her, but not everyone was supportive. The church had its defenders. Letters came in, unsigned or scrawled with barely legible threats. One said, "Your daughter's death is on your hands. God will judge you for destroying his house." Another said, "This is why women shouldn't lead anything." I kept those too. Not because they hurt me, but because they proved the sickness wasn't just in one man. It was in a system, and systems don't heal unless you drag them into the light. We filed for a full audit of the Resurrection Church's finances. What we found was more than negligence. It was corruption, misused funds, backdoor real estate deals, hush money dispersed through mission grants. Pastor Morgan had disappeared from public view, but his signature was everywhere. The district attorney opened a separate investigation. The community that once bowed its head in blind obedience now rose with questions on their lips and fire in their chests. It was a hard fight. There were days I wanted to give up. When the bureaucracy dragged its feet, when the news cycle moved on, when the ache of Emily's absence became too much to breathe through. But then I'd open her diary, or watch her video, or run my fingers across the sketch she once drew of us stick figures under a sky full of clouds. Her with a big, toothy grin, and me holding a coffee cup. And one day, something changed. I received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Dear Mrs. Hennessy. My name is Lila. I'm 16. I never knew Emily, but I read about her. I saw what you're doing. I wanted to say, thank you. When I was 12, my uncle hurt me. I told my church. They told me to forgive. But I didn't want to forgive. I wanted to survive. And because of your voice, I finally spoke up again. I'm safe now. I'm going to counseling. I even drew my own cloud sketch. Emily helped me. You helped me. Thank you for not being silent. I read it 5 times. Then, I cried for a full hour. Not out of pain, but relief. Because for the first time since my daughter's death, I felt like something good was growing out of the ashes. I pinned Lila's letter to my fridge. It stayed there next to Emily's cat drawings and an old spelling test she once got a perfect score on. The past and the present shared space now. Not perfectly, but peacefully. Then came the invitation. The mayor's office wanted to hold a memorial event. Not just for Emily, but for all victims of institutional abuse who had been silenced. They asked if I would speak. I said yes. The ceremony was held in Grant Park, under the open sky. The stage was simple. Rows of white chairs stretched out beneath strings of paper lanterns. There were no sermons, no priests, just voices, and one empty chair on stage, with Emily's name engraved in silver on a wooden plaque. When I stepped up to the podium, I held her bracelet in one hand and Lila's letter in the other. My daughter, I said, was more than a headline. She was art. She was mischief. She was love. And the wall that took her didn't win. Because look around. She tore it down from the inside. Oh. The crowd rose in silence. Lanterns were released into the sky. One of them drifted higher than the rest. I like to think she was riding it, grinning, telling the clouds to move aside because she had somewhere to be. She was never gone. She was only waiting to be heard. And now, she speaks through us all. There's a moment after every speech, every press interview, every courtroom testimony when the lights dim and the noise fades, and I am left standing alone again, not in front of a crowd, not beside a judge, but in the quiet place that grief builds inside your chest. The place that still remembers the way Emily's laugh bounced off the kitchen tiles when she spilled orange juice. The way she would braid my hair while pretending to be my stylist. The way her hand fit into mine like it had always belonged there. That silence is never empty. It holds every heartbeat I lost the day she disappeared. and every heartbeat I regained when her voice rose above the lies. The night after the Grant Park Memorial, I couldn't sleep. I walked the blocks of Southside Chicago like a woman searching for ghosts. But what I found instead were signs of something I never imagined possible after so much loss. In the bakery window where Emily used to press her face against the glass, someone had painted a mural of clouds with her name hidden in the whirls of color. On the library's notice board was a flyer for a new youth writing group titled Emily's Voice. At the church across the street from Resurrection, the one that refused to stay silent during the trial, there was a banner that read, "Truth lives here." My daughter's name had become a promise, not of tragedy, but of change. Still, I knew there was more to do. Open Light had grown into a national network, with the help of survivor advocates, therapists, pro bono attorneys, and volunteers. We began mapping cases across the country, not just in churches, but in schools, foster homes, youth programs. We called it the Wall Project. Every time we confirmed, an institution had buried the truth about abuse, we pinned a red flag on our virtual map. Within 6 months, there were over 200 flags, each one a story, each one a child. It wasn't just data, it was an indictment of silence, so we decided to confront it. We selected 10 locations, 10 places where victims had been ignored, where abusers had been protected, where mothers like me were told they were overreacting. We wrote letters to each institution, requesting public acknowledgement, policy reform, and restitution for survivors. Some responded with apologies. Some ignored us. But one stood out. St. Clement Preparatory Academy, a private religious boarding school in Pennsylvania. 2 former students had written to us, detailing years of abuse by a dorm supervisor who still taught there. One girl, now 25, sent us a photo of a letter she had written at age 15, begging for help. The school never answered. That letter destroyed me. It was a mirror. I saw Emily in every word. We organized a protest. Quiet, respectful, but unmovable. 40 of us, mothers and daughters and survivors, stood outside the academy gates holding photographs. Not signs. Not one of us said a word. We didn't need to. The press came. The school board met, and within 48 hours, the supervisor was placed on leave. An external investigation was opened, and the headmaster resigned. I returned home feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was small, fragile, but real. Then came the phone call. Detective Ortiz, the same woman who had found Emily. Her voice was careful, a steady. "Rachel," she said, "I thought you should know. Something's come up. Something Grant never told us." "Oh." My body froze, she continued. "During the investigation, we seized his correspondence files. One letter was addressed to a man named Luther Grant, his estranged brother. It was never sent. But in it, he mentions another child. A girl. From before. From Louisiana." "How?" I didn't breathe. He said her name was Beth. Ortiz paused. "We're working with local authorities now. But Rachel, there's a chance there's another victim. A girl who never got justice. We don't know if she's alive. Or buried." "Home?" I felt sick. Not with shock, but with knowing Grant had been building walls long before Emily. We hadn't uncovered his past. We'd only begun scraping its surface. I asked to fly down. I wanted to be there. I wanted to see for myself. Ortiz agreed. When I arrived in Baton Rouge, the sky was thick with summer heat. The air felt heavier, as if the city knew what was hidden beneath it. We met with Detective Reeves, a tall man with tired eyes who had been trying to reopen a cold case from 15 years ago, the disappearance of a girl named Bethany Marshall, 13 years old. Last seen at a church camp. No evidence. No body. Just a missing girl and a grieving mother. That mother's name was Clara. She lived in a modest apartment above a laundromat. When I knocked on her door, she opened it and froze. Not because she recognized me, but because she saw something familiar in my face. Pain knows pain. We sat at her table, drank sweet tea, and cried. I thought I was crazy, she whispered. I thought maybe she really did run away. That's what they told me. That she was a troubled girl. No. I said. She wasn't troubled. She was hunted. I showed her Emily's photo. She showed me Bethany's S. They looked like sisters. And suddenly, I knew what had to be done. We dug, not in the dirt, in the files. Clara and I, with the help of Jenna and Ortiz and Reeves, gathered everything we could. Witness lists, camp rosters, sermons archived on cassette tapes, and in one faded transcript, dated the same week, Bethany vanished. Was a name no one had paid attention to. Brother Grant. He had gone by a different last name then. But it was him, and beneath that, a note scribbled in the margins. He's good with the girls. They listened to him. It was all there. In ink, we handed over the evidence, and finally, after 15 years, Bethany's case was reopened. Her mother and I stood side by side at the courthouse steps, not as victims, as mothers who would not forget. We weren't finished, not even close, because Emily's light wasn't a candle. It was a wildfire, and it had found another name to carry. The house where they found Bethany was set back from the road, tucked behind a curtain of pines, its shutters sagging with time, its porch blanketed in moss and silence. It had belonged to an old caretaker of the Louisiana youth camp, a man who died 3 years after Bethany disappeared. No one had touched the property since. But it wasn't the house that mattered. It was the shed behind it. A narrow grey structure with a rusted tin roof and a heavy lock. Detective Reeves had a warrant. The air was thick and unmoving as we approached it. Clara gripped my hand, and I could feel the tremble in her palm. Not from fear, but from knowing. Because mothers always know. Inside the shed was a room. No windows. Soundproofed. The walls were covered with foam panels, and the only furniture was a chair bolted to the floor. A camera, long dead, was mounted in the corner. There were scratch marks on the doorframe, faint, but real. Someone had been there. Someone had tried to get out. I stepped back and gagged. Clara stood frozen, eyes wide. Lips parted in a silent scream that never came. Detective Reeves lowered his head and whispered, "We'll bring in the forensic team. Later." Behind the shed, they found bones. Not a full body, fragments, too old to confirm identity on sight. But next to them, buried shallow under a rotted plank, was a bracelet. Plastic. Beaded. Letters faded with time but still legible. Beth. Clara collapsed into my arms. We both fell to our knees, clutching the earth, sobbing in tandem like two branches of the same broken tree. She didn't scream. She didn't wail. She just whispered. Over and over. She was here. She was here. It took 2 weeks for DNA to confirm it. Bethany Marshall had been found, 15 years too late. But not forgotten. Her mother had kept the same photo in her wallet since the day she disappeared. She showed it to me that night. A little girl with freckles, crooked teeth, and pigtails, smiling like the world had never been cruel. Clara said she loved puzzles. She once stayed up all night, trying to finish a 1,000-piece lighthouse. I smiled. Emily would have liked her. We held a joint memorial in Baton Rouge. 1 candle for each girl. 1 rose each. 1 picture each. Two mothers standing at a podium with nothing left to prove, and everything left to protect. Because this was no longer about justice, it was about prevention. We launched a new initiative, the Window Room Project. Every month, we would identify institutions that failed to protect children. We would send reports, demand transparency, and where we found secrecy, we would shine light. We trained counselors, helped survivors file reports, connected journalists to stories buried for years. But the hardest part wasn't the work. It was going home, because every night, I returned to an empty room. Emily's room. Still untouched. Still sacred. Still echoing the life that once danced there. I used to think I'd close that door forever. But now, I opened it every morning. I talked to her. Not out loud. Just quietly. In my thoughts. I told her where I went. Who I helped. What her name had built. I told her about Bethany. About Clara. About the girl in Idaho who ran away from an abusive uncle and found shelter because someone at the hotline had heard Emily's story and knew how to act. Her legacy wasn't carved in marble, it was sewn into action. Into policies. Into mothers refusing to bury their daughters in silence. One day, a package arrived. No return label. Inside was a journal, empty pages, except for the first. It read, "For the girls who made the sky bigger," and at the bottom, scribbled in handwriting, I didn't recognize but somehow trusted, was a quote. Some rooms have no windows. Some walls are meant to be broken. I sat with that for a long time. Then I picked up a pen. And I began to write, not about loss, but about light. About all the things my daughter taught me in the years I thought I was teaching her. About how love survives even death. And about how a single girl behind a cross-shaped wall started something that no chain, no silence, no lie could ever stop. Emily wasn't just my daughter. She was the one who taught the world how to look again, to see the cracks in the walls, to open the rooms, to speak, to believe, to fight. The day they officially dismantled Resurrection Church, I didn't cry. I stood across the street with Clara beside me, both of us wrapped in coats against the early spring chill, watching the wrecking ball swing toward the brick like it was breaking history open. The sound echoed across the neighborhood. Sharp and final. There were no speeches, no hymns, no congregation left to protest. The church had long become a symbol not of faith, but of failure, and as it came down, brick by brick, he felt no grief, only clarity. The ground underneath shook, and with each crash, I whispered Emily's name like a drumbeat, like an anthem, like a resurrection of the truth that had once been buried inside those walls. A month later, the city announced plans to turn the lot into a park. Not just any park, a sanctuary for children. There would be trees, walking paths, a playground, and in the center, a sculpture. Jenna called me first to ask for permission. "We want to name it after her," she said. Not as a memorial to how she died, but to how she lived, how she changed things. I said yes. Of course I said yes. The statue was unveiled on a cloudy morning. Reporters came. Yes. But this time the cameras felt respectful. Quiet. The mayor made a short speech. Survivors from across the country stood in a wide circle, arms linked, some holding candles, some simply standing in silence. In the center of the park, where the altar once stood, now rose a sculpture made of smooth, silver steel. It wasn't shaped like a child or a church. It was a staircase that curved into a cloud. At the top sat a small, open notebook, cast in bronze. The words on the first page were taken from Emily's real diary. "I believe even broken things can become light if you let them." Clara was there. So was Lila. the girl who wrote to me after seeing Emily's story. So were mothers I had never met in person, women who had traveled from states away to stand together in a moment that felt bigger than loss. Bigger than justice. Bigger, even than healing. I stood in front of the sculpture and closed my eyes. For a moment, I could feel Emily's hand in mine. Not cold. Not distant. Warm. Familiar. As if she'd never left. The wind brushed my cheek like a kiss. And I smiled. After the ceremony, a boy around 9 years old came up to me. He wore a red hoodie and scuffed sneakers, and he held a sheet of paper. "My teacher told us about Emily," he said. I drew her a picture. "Is that okay?" I nodded, heart trembling. He handed me the drawing. A girl with curly hair, standing on a cloud, holding a sword made of pencils. Around her were other kids, smiling. Above her head were the words, "She makes us brave." I knelt down and hugged him, because yes, that's what she did. And still does. Life after loss doesn't go back to normal. There's no version of me that walks into a grocery store without seeing a box of cereal she used to like, and pausing for just a second too long. There's no version of me that hears laughter in the hallway at school and doesn't wish it was hers. But grief doesn't own me now. It walks beside me. And behind it walks purpose. Open Light has grown into a national non-profit. We've opened offices in 6 states, passed legislation in 3, trained hundreds of counselors and educators. We've made schools safer. Churches more transparent, and survivors more heard. And it started with a girl who once believed in clouds. I still teach. I still walk to school. I still wake up with a prayer on my lips, though not to the God who looked away, but to the daughter who never stopped looking forward. And on some days, when the air is quiet and the light hits just right, I hear her, not her ghost. Her voice, not in my ears, but in my spine, not in my sadness, but in my fire. Because she left me a sky that wasn't full of stars. She left me one waiting to be built. I see it now. Every time a child speaks, every time a mother refuses to be silenced, every time a wall comes down and the sun pours in. This is what survival looks like. This is what legacy becomes. Emily Hennessy is not a footnote. She is a beginning. She is the sky wide open, and I will spend the rest of my life walking toward it. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking every step of this journey with me. Through the courtroom, through the grief, through the protests, through the silence and the shattering, through the fire and the rebuilding. This wasn't just a story about a girl named Emily. This was about all the girls the world tries to forget. All the children hidden behind walls of churches, of systems, of power, of fear. Emily was stolen, but she left something behind. Her courage, her words, her light. And that light lit 1,000 others. The lesson is simple, but not easy. Listen when a child whispers. Believe them before it's too late. Speak even if your voice shakes. Tear down the walls, even if you have to do it brick by brick. Alone at first, because sometimes the smallest voice is the one that changes everything. Emily didn't live long, but she lived loud in silence, in art, in love, in resistance. She taught me that walls don't win. Light does. So if you have a story, tell it. If you know someone carrying pain, sit with them. If you see a room with no windows, open a door. And if someone ever tells you that the truth is dangerous, remember, it's only dangerous to those who need it, buried. If this story moved you, please subscribe, comment, and share. Not for views, but so that another mother doesn't wake up to an empty bed, so that another child isn't told to stay silent, so that Emily's voice and every voice like hers is never forgotten again. This isn't the end. It's the beginning of the sky. And it's yours too.